And in response to your specific question, does China want to become number one? The answer is yes and no. Why do I say yes and no? Yes, because they want to have the world's largest economy. Because they know at the end of the day, what will protect China is having the largest economy in the world. But at the same time, the Chinese don't have the same ambition that United States does to run the world.
马凯硕和主持人聊了3个小时，聊完后全场沉默。他说，美国正在打一场没有战略的战争，而中国早已算好了每一步棋。这不是危言耸听，这是基辛格在私下午餐中亲口说的。美国对华最大的战略错误，就是发起了一场没有战略的竞赛。今天这段对话没有滤镜，用最冷静的第三方视角拆解中国如何在世界最强对手的围堵下悄然成为世界强国。听完你会发现，真正的强大从来不是喊出来的。
Professor, firstly, it's a great pleasure to have you here with us tonight. I want to start our conversation by asking the following. With the upcoming US election by the end of this year, are we expected to witness a real potential change in the US foreign policy towards China? Isn't it a state policy or it's a policy related to the president himself?
Well, the answer I'm going to give you is a very paradoxical one. On the one hand, the outcome of the elections could change nothing. On the other hand, it could change everything. So why do I give this paradoxical answer? Because it's very, very clear that even though the United States, as we all know today, is a deeply divided society where Americans cannot agree on anything, there's only one thing they agree on. It's time to stop China. So regardless of who's the president, the mission to stop China will continue. And that policy has become deeply embedded in both the establishment, the society, and everyone seems to agree that this is the time for United States to stop China. But at the same time, the reason why I say it could change everything is that if Trump wins, which is certainly possible, I think you can never tell what Trump is going to do. He could go to either extreme, right? Certainly he'll carry on the contest against China. There's no question about that at all. But how? And he could make things a lot worse, much, much worse. So therefore, we have to prepare ourselves for all possibilities. Certainly, if you come from small states like UAE or Singapore, as I do, you have to recognize that we, whether we like it or not, are now witnessing the largest geopolitical contest ever seen in human history. And I say the largest geopolitical contest because we've never had powers of the size and scale of the United States today and China going head to head. And because this is such an immense geopolitical contest, it will rock the world and it will affect all of us, no matter what we do, no matter where we live. And that's why we need to understand this, and that's why I think it's very timely that you're having this dialogue here in UAE now.
That's right. So you said that all the Americans agree on one thing, which is like to stop China. So does that mean like the US has like a strategy or a grand strategy to stop China? Or it's like more related to each president and his way of dealing with China?
Well, I'm glad you used the words grand strategy. Because when I was writing my book, Has China Won?, I had the privilege of having a very long one-on-one lunch with someone who was then clearly America's greatest living strategic thinker, Henry Kissinger. It was a long lunch. hour and a half, 2 hours. And at the end of the lunch, when I went back, I asked myself, what was the message that Henry Kissinger was trying to give to me at this one-on-one lunch? And it became clear to me after I reflected on my conversation with him that the message he was telling me was that the biggest strategic mistake that the United States is making in this contest against China is that it has launched this contest without a strategy. I thought, gosh, that's a very profound thing to say. So I had to write to him. I wrote to Henry Kissinger and I said, Dear Henry, thank you for the lunch. Do you mind if I cite you saying this in my book? And fortunately, he gave me his permission. So the fact that someone as senior and as well-informed as Henry Kissinger can say that there's no strategy is a very important point. And it's also confirmed by the evidence, right? While we know for sure that the United States will carry out actions in one way or another against China, it's not clear what the goal is. I mean, is the goal to stop China's economic development? It cannot be done. Is the goal to overthrow the Chinese Communist Party? It cannot be done. Is the goal to successfully contain and isolate China like the way the United States successfully isolated and contained Soviet Union? It can't be done. So if it's not clear what the goals are, people are asking, you've launched this contest, what is your end game? What will constitute a victory for you? And as you know, that has never been spelled out by anybody. Except once, I think, President Joe Biden in passing mentioned, saying the Chinese aim to become number one, and he said, it ain't gonna happen on my watch. So basically what he's saying, I will not allow Chinese economy to overtake the US economy while I'm still president. So clearly, if you look at all the actions that have been taken, the tariffs, the chip war, they're all designed in one way or another to slow down the Chinese economic growth. Because I think the United States has made, in some ways, a rational calculation that if and when the Chinese economy becomes number one, everything changes. And the very privileged position that the United States has had for, by the way, 130, 140 years as the number one power in the world, that can change. And here I want to emphasize that I do believe, and this is also a result of my conversation with Henry Kissinger, that there is a wiser strategy for the United States. Instead of trying to stop China, the United States should try to work with China to create a world which has enough space for two big powers. And that was also, by the way, a strategy that the former President Bill Clinton suggested in a speech that he gave in Yale in 2003. And in my book, Has China Won? I cite the speech he gave where he said, Bill Clinton said, if the US is going to be number one forever, then we can keep on doing what we are doing. But he added a but. He said, but if we can conceive of a world where we are no longer number one, then surely it's in the United States' interests to build multilateral institutions, multilateral processes, multilateral rules, multilateral norms that will in one way or another constrain China. And that would be a wiser strategy. So those of us who are friends of the US and friends of China should therefore be advocating to both of them, why don't you adopt a wiser strategy that would be better for both of you and better for us, instead of this rather destructive zero-sum game that is being played out now?
This leads me to two questions, actually. Like the first one, you mentioned like China, they are trying to prevent China from being number one. How do you define number one in this world? Like, are we talking economically, or like politically, Or what exactly? And does China really wants to be number one in this world?
That's actually a very good question. And the first definition of being number one in the world is definitely the economic dimension. Because if you have the largest economy, that gives you a lot of weight. But I want to emphasize that what I haven't mentioned so far is the complexity of the US-China contest. And in some ways it's hinted in your question, it's a multi-dimensional contest. It's being played out in economics, in the military dimension, in the political dimension, and in what Joseph Nye calls a soft power dimension. So it is actually conceivable for the United States to become, in nominal GDP terms, the number 2 power, but yet remain the number 1 most influential power in the world. It can't do that. I mean, if it does adopt a wise strategy. So, for example, I can tell you the most powerful weapon the United States has in the world is not its aircraft carriers, it's not its F-35 jets, it's the US dollar. Because the power of the US dollar means that you can impose sanctions, right? And you can take away $300 billion from Russia, okay? You can do that. So, so there are ways and means for the United States to remain the most influential power in the world, even if its nominal GDP becomes number 2. And in response to your specific question, does China want to become number 1? The answer is yes and no. Why do I say yes and no? Yes, because they want to have the world's largest economy. Because they know at the end of the day, what will protect China is having the largest economy in the world. But at the same time, the Chinese don't have the same ambition that the United States does to run the world. The United States, as you know, is present in all corners of the world, intervening in this issue, intervening in that issue, taking care of this problem, taking care of that problem. The Chinese view is that we are 1.4 billion people, we have enough problems at home, we will take care of our problems, the world will take care of itself. So in that sense, I don't think the Chinese have a desire to step into the shoes of the United States in terms of its global involvement in various issues. So in that sense, I think it is actually possible, therefore, and the reason I'm making these suggestions is that I'm looking for ways and means of creating a world where United States and China can live together in peace without having going at loggerheads with each other.
So you just said like the United States doesn't have any strategy regarding China. Let's go to the other side. How about the Chinese? Do they have a grand strategy in dealing with the US?
Well, as the weaker party, if they didn't have a strategy, they'd be in deep trouble. I think out of necessity, they have to have a strategy. And they do have one. So, for example, they ask themselves the obvious question. Why did United States successfully defeat the Soviet Union? Why? And they must say, the one country that has studied the collapse of the Soviet Union more carefully than any country in the world is China, because China knows that the dream of the United States is to make China the second Soviet Union that collapses. So how does China prevent a collapse? First point, the Soviet Union didn't collapse because of external pressures. It collapsed because of internal weaknesses. And so China realizes, to make sure I survive, I must have a very strong, dynamic economy and a strong, dynamic society. And by the way, there was a very famous American thinker, George Kennan, who said way back in 1949 very presciently, he said, at the end of the day, the outcome of the contest between United States and Soviet Union will depend on not on our weapons and troops and all that. It will depend on which society has got greater spiritual vibrancy inside, stronger. And so United States society was far more dynamic than Soviet Union society. United States thrive, Soviet Union collapse. So the Chinese know that the first priority is to make sure your economy is strong and your society is strong, which is why they're massively educating their people and growing their economy so that they don't become a second Soviet Union. The second thing the Chinese learned from the collapse of the Soviet Union was that the United States succeeded because it managed to get a lot of the neighbors of the Soviet Union to join the containment policy everywhere. Western Europe, Japan, South Korea, right? Both ends of the Soviet Union. So what did the Chinese do? The Chinese launched a preemptive strike against a containment policy by making sure that its neighbors depended on the Chinese economy. I'll give you a simple example. Singapore is part of Southeast Asia, and we are part of an organization called ASEAN. And ASEAN started as a pro-American organization, okay? In fact, when ASEAN was created on August 8, 1967, both the Soviet Union and China denounced the creation of ASEAN as a pro-American organization, right? And it's true, ASEAN was pro-American, pro-Western. And what was stunning was that even though ASEAN was pro-American, pro-Western, and we had longer dialogues with United States, European Union, Australia, Japan, everybody, none of our Western friends proposed a free trade agreement to ASEAN. The first country to propose a free trade agreement to ASEAN was China in 2001. And the impact of that China-ASEAN agreement was phenomenal. Because in the year 2000, and that's when China proposed the free trade agreement, ASEAN's trade with the United States was $135 billion, and our trade with China was only $40 billion. So US trade was, more than 3.5 times what China's trade with ASEAN was. But as a result of the free trade agreement, by 2022, even though ASEAN's trade with United States has gone from 135 to 450, 500 billion, an increase of over 3 times, China's trade with ASEAN went from $40 billion to $975 billion, almost $1 trillion. The world's largest trading relationship in 2022. So that was then, there's no way ASEAN can join a containment policy against its largest trading partner, right? It's crazy. So that's how, that's part of the Chinese strategy. And I mentioned a third one very quickly. You take the Belt and Road Initiative that China has launched, building infrastructure in all corners of the world. What does that mean? Every country in the world says, oh, this infrastructure is good. I need Chinese fast trains, I need Chinese highways. And then would you join a containment policy? You won't. So that it shows you that they have systematically worked out a grand strategy. But at the same time, I can tell you that the Chinese also have a lot of respect for the United States. They understand that United States as a power is a remarkable power. And so their challenge is, even with all this strategy, they cannot underestimate what the United States can eventually do.
Professor, you have mentioned before, and even we were having a discussion earlier today, that the US has 10 years to counter the rise of China. Why specifically 10 years?
Well, I think it's all a matter of mathematics. And if the Chinese economy keeps growing, right, at 5% a year over 10 years, and I don't have the maths off the top of my head, even if it doesn't overtake, it comes very, very close. And the bigger China gets, the harder it is to stop it. And it's quite clear that the Chinese have been quite ingenious in creating a long-term manufacturing strategy for China. And that manufacturing capability of China is now indispensable to the rest of the world. I mean, all of you, if you open your kitchen cupboards or whatever it is, take out the products. See how many of the components in any of the products came from China. Just check. You'll be amazed. This is not by accident. China wants to create deep dependence on China's manufacturing sector. And you know, incidentally, even 5 years ago, if you had asked anybody, could China ever join the competition for cars? He would say, no way, the Germans are so far ahead, Japanese are so far ahead, Koreans are far ahead, even the Americans are far ahead. But you know what, today, the Chinese have started from scratch, created an electric vehicle, EV industry, that is now frightening the pants of all car makers all over the world. Because the Chinese manufacturing ecosystem on EVs is so amazing, right? And even Elon Musk at first dismissed it. Now he wouldn't dare to dismiss it. But did this EV challenge from China emerge by accident? No. It is part of the long-term strategy, right? And 5 years from now, all over the world, you see Chinese EVs. So as the world transforms and becomes more dependent on China, it narrows the options for the United States. I mean, quite naturally. Which is why there is in Washington, D.C., a very strong sense of urgency. And by the way, you know, if you look at what some of the people who, some of the Americans, I can give you names, Robert Lighthizer, Matt Pottinger, they'll be coming back to advise Trump. They are the ones who are saying, hurry up, we've got to act fast. So the sense of urgency in Washington, D.C. is very real.
And so this leads me to the next question, like what are the measures that the US could take in order to counter the rise of China? Like, and is this measures going to differ from Biden to Trump?
Well, I think the best answer to your question, what should the United States do, was given by George Kennan in the remark I quoted earlier in 1949, where he said at the end of the day, the outcome of the contest will depend on which country's domestic society is stronger. And here, the challenge for the United States today, sadly, is that it has become a deeply divided society, right? And in my book, as you know, Has China Won, in chapter 7, I provide lots of empirical data, but taken from American scholars, by the way. You know, people like Paul Volcker, former head of the Fed, Joe Stiglitz, the Nobel laureate, or Martin Wolf of Financial Times. They've all given data to show how United States has essentially become a plutocracy. What is a plutocracy? A plutocracy is a society where public policy decisions are made not to benefit the majority at the bottom, but the top 1%, 2%. That's what and by the way, this whatever I'm saying is not original from me. American scholars have saying all this. I'm just repeating what American scholars are saying. And the reason why it looks as though Trump is going to get elected is that the bottom 50% in America, the data shows this, haven't seen an improvement in their standard of living for 30, 40 years. In fact, the American middle class has diminished, significantly. So, therefore, if the United States wants to win the contest against China, it should rebuild the strength of its domestic society. That should be its priority. Because at the end of the day, you know, like in any athletic contest, right? You're better off trying to win by running faster rather than trying to kneecap your opponent. And that should be the best thing that United States can do. So, but changing United States society and taking care of plutocracy is going to be a major challenge. And that has to be the answer of the United States.
That's very informative. Let's talk about the elections and the U.S. elections. And before we ask about that, we always when we discuss the upcoming U.S. elections, we only talk about either Biden or Trump. Is it really the case that the U.S. most dominant parties lack other options other than Biden or Trump?
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. It's quite puzzling because in terms of human talent, no society can beat the United States, frankly. Because, the United States' biggest strength is that it attracts the best brains, not just from 330 million people within the United States. It attracts the best brains from 8 billion people in the world, right? And the United States is the only country, I think, where its largest corporations like Google is run by someone born in India, Sundar Pichai. Microsoft is run by Satya Nadella, born in India. So, that's quite remarkable. So if there's no other society that can match the talent of the United States. And frankly, I was a visiting fellow at UPenn in March, 2 months ago, and 3 months ago. And when you go to American universities, the quality of mind of the researchers is dazzling. Dazzling. You meet people and you sit there with great awe and you wonder, my God, it's amazing research these people are doing. And yet, despite the fact that the United States has the best talent laboratories in the world, it produces two candidates like Trump and Biden. I mean, Biden, by the way, is a very nice guy. He would have been a great president 20 years ago, clearly. But now, at his age, it's going to be a challenge for him. And I say that, I personally, if you ask me, most of us, and frankly, most of the rest of the world would rather vote for Joe Biden rather than Donald Trump, because Donald Trump would be disruptive, and Joe Biden will not be disruptive. But of course, we have no choice. We have to accept whoever is the president. And unfortunately, the prospects of Trump being elected seem to be getting stronger, sadly. And so I suspect it will be a Trump-Biden election. But what the results will be, I would say that one lesson we are learning is that in democratic societies, never predict the results of elections. Until 3 weeks ago, everybody was telling me that Prime Minister Modi would win big time, 350 to 400 seats. What did he get? 240. So you see, elections are very surprising. So I would say be ready for surprises in the US election because there are too many factors at play in this contest.
Thank you, Professor. And before we conclude, Professor, please, you have 1 minute only. If you have any final thoughts or insights, only 1 minute. So.
In 1 minute, I can promise you that you will not be bored in the next 10 years. The US-China contest will accelerate.
这段对话最狠的一击反差拳，直接打在美国最骄傲的战略能力上。教授转述基辛格的原话：美国对华最大的战略错误是发起了一场没有战略的竞赛。目标是什么？遏制中国经济，推翻执政党，孤立中国，一个都没说清楚。而反观中国，作为弱势方，却有一套精密到可怕的大战略。 中国从苏联解体中只读出了2条铁律：第一，苏联不是被外部压力压垮的，是被内部虚弱拖死的。所以，中国的头等大事不是对外扩张，而是确保经济和社会永远有活力。第二，美国当年能赢苏联，是因为拉拢了苏联的所有邻居一起围堵。所以，中国做了什么？抢在美国之前，用自贸协定把东盟绑在了自己的经济战车上。2000年，东盟与美国的贸易额是中国的3倍多。到2022年，中国与东盟的贸易额飙到近1万亿美元，把美国远远甩在身后。这就是中国的先发制人。当你的邻居靠你吃饭，他们就不可能加入遏制你的联盟。教授说，10年前，如果你问任何人中国能不能造好车，答案都是不可能。德国、日本、韩国太领先了。但今天，中国从零起步，打造了一个让全球汽车巨头吓破胆的电动车生态系统，连马斯克都不敢再轻视。这不是意外，这是长期制造战略的一部分，让中国成为世界离不开的工厂。教授引用1949年乔治·凯南的话：美苏之争的终点取决于哪个社会的国内活力更强。而今天的美国呢？底层50%的人口30-40年没有见过生活改善，社会撕裂，政策被顶层1%的财阀绑架。所以教授说了一句极其讽刺的话：在竞技场上，你更好的策略是自己跑得更快，而不是去打断对手的腿。